Is the mic on? Don't think so, or can you thumbs up if you hear me? Not via the mic, right? Is it better now?
Misschien staat het nog.
Oh, 6.
Oh. Sorry.
Nee, yeah. All those technical issues. I think this is better, right? Okay, we'll do it like this. Well, good afternoon, everybody. As Jitse said, I'm Laura. I'm from the Utrecht University, and I'm here to tell you something about social safety. I'm doing a PhD right now at Utrecht University on social safety. And that's why they asked me to tell you more about it. I'm doing this PhD also together with the Dutch Labour Authority. They supervise organizations on, well, all kind of topics that are related to safe and healthy work environments. And of course, social safety is also an important factor in that. So my research also focuses a bit more on this organizational level, but I will dive into, well, different levels of social safety today. Please feel free to raise your hands, ask questions during the presentation, but also in the end there will be some room left for a bit of a discussion or any questions that are left, but also feel free to interrupt. Well, as I said, I study social safety is what I said, but there are different terms when it comes to social safety. And yeah, I introduced it as social safety, but on organizational level, it's basically more psychosocial safety. So I just want to briefly go into that to explain to you what the difference is between those terms, because maybe you also heard the terms like social safety, psychological safety, and that might be confusing. So that's why I thought it was good to start today with a bit of an introduction on that. And this is an overview colleagues of mine made, in which they kind of make the distinction between the different terms. I think social safety is the most common used term for this topic. But basically that's only when you look into this topic on an individual level. So it's developed by Slavic, who made the social safety theory. And it's really based on this evolutionary perspective that says that, well, you maybe can also imagine that for animals, if they're excluded from the group, that's dangerous, so that causes stress. And that's also for us humans. So if we're excluded from the group, or we have that feeling, or if we experience that risk of being excluded, that leads to this stress reaction, this physical reaction, which can also be seen with people having a burnout, for example. But that's really focusing on what it does to the individual, to your individual body. And another level of looking into this topic is psychological safety. And psychological safety is more looking into the team dynamics. So yeah, you probably also work in teams a lot in your study, but maybe also in sports teams or at your work. And there you have, of course, team dynamics. That's always there. And when it comes to this psychological safety, it's about feeling safe enough to speak up. So especially when you have an opinion that's different from the other people in the group, it's of course important that you feel safe to share that opinion. Also because, well, research shows that that's important for the team performance. I think you all maybe heard that, you want a diverse group, you want diversity, inclusion. That's also because when there's only one person determining what the group will do, you will get less optimal outcome from the group performance than when you have multiple people with diverse opinions, sharing that opinion and working together. And that's also with, well, this psychological safety. It's important that everybody in the group feels free to and safe to speak up and share those opinions to get to the best team performance. And then most high up in the pyramid, that's basically the level that I focus on mostly, because that's more the organizational level, as we say it. That's the psychosocial safety climate, which I might not pronounce right every time because it's really hard, psychosocial safety climate. But that's more from, as I said, the organizational level. But organization could be, well, I don't know, a company. But an organization is, of course, also a student association or a faculty or the university in general that are all seen as this organizational level. And there it's also, of course, important that there's attention for, well, social safety on an individual level, but this psychosocial safety, how we call it, on the organizational level. I want to zoom into that a little bit because I think, or at least I hope, it makes sense that it's important that this topic is on the agenda of this organization, the board or management or this more high over level. But it's not only about, well, having it on the agenda. There's more to it to make sure that the environment for the people within this, well, let's say organization or faculty, really feels safe. And that's not only being aware of it. What's important is also this management support. So that's also not only the management board, but of course, in all kinds of organizations, you will have different layers of management. So you have this high up management, but there are probably also some levels in between before you go to the individual member of the group or of the organization. And also all those layers need to support this idea from the management, but also support the individual. So if something happens, maybe there's a case of sexual harassment, then to foster this psychosocial safe environment, it's important that you feel supported by this management level, to deal with it. And that I don't say, well, yeah, I'm sorry for you that it happened, but, well, let's move on. That when you have that, you will, of course, never feel truly safe or supported. So that's one of the elements that is important. And the other one, management priority. Well, as I said, it should be on the agenda, but that's only one thing. What we see often is it's on the agenda, but when it really comes down to a specific situation, it's more important to reach the team goals, be productive, reach certain targets, and that's then given priority over, well, I would say the wealth of the people within the group or within the organization. And that's what happens a lot also in academia. We all tell each other that's really important that people feel safe, but in the end, you do need to get this publication, or you do need to finish this team project, or you do need to get a good grade. And that's always a bit difficult because, yeah, it always comes down to the specific moments to find out whether it really is a priority or not. Then the third element is the organizational communication. What we see a lot is that people, or the management board or people higher up in the organization, come up with a lot of great ideas. So codes of conduct, there may be a confidential advisor, but nobody tells the people within the organization. So it could be that within your faculty, there are a lot of great initiatives on this, but as long as it's not communicated throughout the organization, yeah, you basically have nothing. It doesn't really make sense to have all those things if nobody knows about it. So that's an important aspect of this, creating this psychosocial safety climate as well. And last but not least is the organizational involvement, the participation. So if you want to come up with this code of conduct, maybe you're also part of a student board or some sort of student representative for the faculty, then it's important to also include this individual, I would say, bottom-up approach to make sure that everybody feels heard. And if we, well, determine this code of conduct, that it's based on what the people that it's about find important. And that's not only top-down, someone in their ivory tower making something up, then it still wouldn't work. So these are kind of this basic elements that, well, I hope also make sense to you. It's not rocket science, I guess. But it's important to be aware of this, that you need to take this into account if you want to foster this, well, safe climate for, well, all the people in the organization. And as I said, I'm talking a lot about organization, but yeah, that could also be your student board or your faculty, and in some situations also university-wide, of course. Well, then a little bit more about the first findings of my research. As I said, is that I'm working together with the Dutch Labour Authority, and they're really used to looking at what's on paper. So according to the law, organizations need to have some things on paper when it comes to this psychological safety. But yeah, of course we can believe that it's important. It's written in the law, so it makes sense that the Labour Authority is checking that, and that you have to have the right procedures in mind. So yeah, there have to be a confidential advisor, codes of conduct, reporting procedures when something happens. Of course you need that, you cannot go without it. But in the past years, a lot of focus was on this. People were only looking in this paperwork, is this there? Do we have something written about it? Do we have the policies and the procedures? But then we're missing something. And what we're missing is the perceptions of the people that it's about. So it could be that you have everything written down on paper, you have the perfect policies, the perfect reporting procedures, so when something happens, you have this you thought about everything and you know exactly where to go. But it could be that if you talk to the people within the faculty or within your student association, people don't feel safe. And that's what it's in the end all about. People should feel safe. That's the target you have. The goal you want to achieve is that people feel safe to speak up, to be themselves. It could be that a policy supports that, but only looking at the policies is not telling you how people feel. So this is this extra dimension, and again, don't think it's rocket science. But for example, for the Labour Authority, this is something, I wouldn't say shocking, but it's something they didn't take into account until a half year ago. They only looked into these procedures. And I think a lot of organizations do that as well. So when they say they want to do something about this social safety, psychological safety, they look into these procedures and they make another procedure. When it's not working and people, still incidents happen, then they make a new procedure. But they don't ever ask their employees or the members of their association, how do you feel? Do you feel safe? So that's something we should include as well. Well, no surprise. We combine the two, and we get this really easy model where we say you need policies. It's important to have policies. It's important to know the codes of conduct, what is allowed, what is not. But you also need people to feel safe. You need to know how they feel. And when both are okay, you would conclude in this organization, in this group, people feel safe. It's a safe environment. Well, both of them are not. Makes sense. You would say it's unsafe. But I think the other two are more important or more interesting to look at. Because if you only look in those procedures, the only thing you could conclude, if the procedures are there and they have the right procedures, that it looks safe. And as I said, a lot of people stop there and they say, well, maybe also from an outsider perspective, this looks safe. But yeah, that's not the same as safe, I would argue. But on the other hand, don't forget about the procedures. Because if you only look into how people feel, you can conclude they feel safe. And maybe you can argue that's better than only looking safe, because in the end, maybe about the feelings. But what we notice, and also that's shown by research, is that if you only, have this feel safe, that's often depending on nice team dynamics, a good team manager. Certain organizations or teams might never encounter something difficult, so everybody still feels safe. But then, when something happens, or you hire a new person, or the manager leaves and you get a new one that's maybe not such a good manager, that feeling safe is gone quite quickly. Especially when you don't have the procedures So if something happens, you don't know where to go. Maybe there isn't a confidential advisor. Maybe there isn't something that says what is allowed and what's not, or what consequences should be there in case something misbehaves. So this feeling safe might seem better than looking safe, but it's still not enough. You need both to get this safe environment. Well, that's, I hope, clear. But then still, if you know you need to look at the procedures, you need to look at the perceptions, yeah, that doesn't mean that it's easy to create a safe work environment or a safe study environment. And in academia, we see that one of the issues is this power dynamics. I think you can recognize this. If you're having an issue with a professor, it might be hard to speak up, say something to this person, because there's this sort of hierarchy. And that hierarchy can make you feel insecure, can make it difficult for you to speak up. And on the other hand, it can also influence how these people higher up behave, because they might feel this power. They might feel that they're, well, able to say something or, well, make a comment that, well, you wouldn't make to peers, but you could make to someone that's lower in the hierarchy. Well, that's something we're not going to change. This hierarchy will be there, and I'm not here to tell you how to change the hierarchy. I think it will be really difficult, and you will also encounter this in a lot of other situations. But it's good to be aware of it, and also, well, be aware of what you can do to deal with this power distance, the power dynamics. One of the things is that a lot of people fear the consequences. So if you want to speak up to your professor, that can be hard because you think, yeah, I don't want to be this difficult student, or this person is going to grade me. Yeah, how do you deal with that? Be aware of it. And maybe also think of these consequences and determine for yourself, is this fear real? Should I have this fear? Would it really have a negative impact if I speak up? Maybe it's not such a problem. What we see is that a lot of people decide not to speak up because they're afraid of the consequences, or because they think, well, I'm only one student. Why should I be the one telling this professor that what he says is just not okay or crosses the line for me? But then my advice would be always discuss it with your peers. You're probably not alone. There are probably other people. And the risk is that when you don't speak up, people think you agree. When no one says something to this professor, he might think, well, all the students like me. They like my jokes. Or everybody is thinking, well, this is really inappropriate, and this old man is making this joke. This might be appropriate 50 years ago, but now we don't feel that it's safe. We don't want to accept this. But as long as nobody's speaking up, it could also be interpreted as consent, that you agree. So try to keep that in mind. Of course, I cannot ask you to always be the one speaking up, but if everybody is more aware of it, and is also aware of the fact that, yeah, if I'm not speaking up, people think I agree. Is it worth it? People thinking that? Is it worth this professor just continuing what he is doing or she is doing? Maybe not. Maybe it is worth it to speak up, to say something about it. And as I said, like it can be hard to do that alone. So also find peers. Find other students, do it together, create that feeling of trust among each other to also help speak up to someone that's higher up in the hierarchy. Because of course it's more difficult when you feel in such a position. Well, and coming back to what I said multiple times, but I think that's an important message that I want to bring to you today is that you need trust. You need to feel safe in order to speak up. And that not coming from these rules, these procedures, it's coming from interaction with each other. And you need probably the safety to speak up, but you also can create that together. And you can also create it with people that are higher up. So normalize that. Normalize speaking to people in this kind of positions. Well, one of the things that can help is feedback. A lot of times we see feedback as something difficult. We maybe even see feedback as criticism, which can make it difficult to accept feedback, but can also make it difficult to give feedback. Well, research shows, and it's also, I hope, more common also among you, like young people, feedback isn't always criticism. You need feedback to learn, to grow. You need feedback for good team performance. So keep that in mind if you want to give feedback, but also if you're receiving feedback. Don't take it as criticism, but take it as an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow. And I think also, as I said before, like normalize speaking up to people higher up in the hierarchy. But that's not only professors or people that are, well, maybe seen as high up in the hierarchy. It's also among student groups. You probably also need to do this group assignments, all this kind of teamwork that sometimes is nice, but also sometimes is difficult. Try to also see that as an opportunity to practice. When you're finished your studies and you need to start working in this professional work environment, there will probably also be a lot of group work. You will also have to deal with managers and people higher up. Then it's easier if you're used to this feedback already, instead of you have to learn it in this situation where you might, when you just start working, feel even more vulnerable than you do now as a student. So maybe also practice it together in a more safe setting, to also make it easier in settings that now maybe don't feel that safe yet. Because in the end, that will make the feedback easier, but giving this feedback will also make this now maybe not yet safe environment feel a little bit safer. Create an environment together in which everybody can be themselves. We can speak up. And we can grow together and also, well, enhance performances. Because I said you need this diversity, different opinions, people speaking up. That's necessary in order to get to this better team performance. And one tool that can help in giving feedback, situation, behavior, impact. So every time you want to give feedback, and especially when it's a bit difficult or you don't really know how to say it, and of course you can always practice it with someone you trust, a friend or another student. Always start describing the situation in which something happened. So for example, in our last group meeting, then the behavior. So what's the behavior that you want to give feedback on? Or maybe the behavior was, you interrupted me all the time. And then the impact. So what does it to you? Well, because you interrupted me all the time, I had the feeling that I couldn't share my ideas. That's what it does to you. And by keeping this structure, so situation, behavior, and impact, you also make it a little bit more, I would say, objective. You help yourself to stick to this one situation, so you don't say you always do this, because that's hard. If someone is telling you, you always, you want a clear example of what was the situation in which I did that you didn't like. Also the behavior. It's not about someone's personality or someone's intentions. It's a behavior they showed at that moment that you didn't like or you think could be improved, or maybe you were okay with it, but you noticed that it did something to the group's dynamic. And then the impact, keep it to what it means to you, what it did to your feelings, and not on, well, what it did to others. Because then it's maybe for the others to speak up. And then maybe discuss it with this person that you think was impacted. Encourage the other person to speak up. Because otherwise you will quite quickly get in this discussion like, how do you know that I was offending this other student? Yeah, well, you can have arguments for that, but it can be really hard to be in a discussion. So my advice would be keep this structure, practice with that. And also, I think it is then easier to accept the feedback that you get. Because it's about a specific situation, it's about behavior. Well, behavior is something you can change. And it's about the impact it had on the other person. And maybe you don't agree, or you would say, well, I wouldn't be impacted by this joke or this behavior. But you can always understand that, well, then it, turns out that it had the impact on the other person. Apparently, it did something. Maybe unintentional, but the impact was there. So I think those are key takeaways. So don't only, so if you're in a board or your faculty is asking you to think along on this subject of social safety, psychological safety, try to not only look at the procedures, but also look at the feelings and the perceptions of people. Keeping that in mind, also be aware of, what it then entails. Creating this feeling, that's not about making this social safety a priority. It's, for example, also about communicating it, incorporating the input from people all around your organization, your study association. And then start with small actions yourself. What can you do to create a safe work environment or a safe study environment? Well, be aware of this power dynamics. Be aware of what it means when you don't speak up. People might then think that you agree with what's happening. Is that okay for you? Or if you don't agree, maybe then dare to speak up once, or try to find other people that feel the same and do it together. And last but not least, the feedback. Try to create an environment together where you can give and receive feedback. And to help you with that, you can use this structure. Duration, behavior, impact. Always keep it to what it does to you. I feel insecure when you interrupt me all the time. I don't feel safe to speak up if you're always voicing your opinions so strong. Keep it to yourself. Keep it on the behavior of the other people, not on their intentions, because you don't know. Maybe they didn't want to offend you, but it's the behavior that did something to you, and the behavior you can say something about, because also behavior is something that's relatively easy to change. So that's feedback that's helping the other person, instead of only pointing out what you don't like. And maybe last but not least, assume shared goals. When you're in a team project, there's, probably someone free riding, not cooperating. It's hard to give this feedback. It's hard to stick to this impact it has on yourself, the behavior of other people. It's quite easy to assume that this other people is just, not motivated, or, has this intention to do as little as possible and get the best results out of it. But before making all these assumptions, start a conversation. And start from the assumption that you want to reach the same. Probably in the end you'll want to graduate, you'll want to get good grades, or at least good enough to get the course and move on to the next year in your studies. When you start from that viewpoint, it's easier to have an open discussion. Instead, when you start from the assumption that someone is not motivated, or that a professor wants to harm you, or wants to assault someone with this old funny joke that doesn't feel right. Because, in the end, we're all quite similar, although we often see the differences. But when it comes to the social safety, psychological safety, it starts with the people. It doesn't start with policies and procedures, it starts with the people. So it also starts with us. With you, everyone who came to this lecture probably is interested in the topic, wants to change something, maybe has own experiences. Try to keep that in mind and try to make these small steps, because together we can make a change more than only writing a new policy. It's about this personal aspect. That's what I want you to take home from today and incorporate in your everyday life. That's it. Are there any questions or comments? Or I think so.
Well, thank you, Laura, for giving this lecture, and also thank you all for coming. If you have any questions after this, you can also always come up to Laura, and you can scan your My Future cards upstairs. And